Hello everyone and welcome back to Killershrewfan's Killer Toy Reviews. For this week's review we're going to be taking a look at this. It's A-Shu the Qianzhousaurus by PNSO. I still don't know if I'm pronouncing either of those things correctly, but yeah, I decided I would be doing my PNSO reviews in reverse order of appearance. So we started with Domingo, who is the most recent release that I own. Now we're going to A-Shu, and so on and so forth. So yes, this is the third new PNSO therapod I will be looking at on the channel, and I'm happy to say that it is yet another awesome addition to PNSO's growing lineup. I ended up getting this in from Dan's Dinosaurs. It was part of that big unboxing I did on the channel a while back, so if you'd like to see that, link is in the description below. But this was one of the ones I was quite excited to get my hands on, and now that I finally have it, I am quite excited to talk about it, so let's get to it. But before we talk about the figure itself, let's real quick take a look at the packaging. It comes in the standard prehistoric animal line packaging with the stark white background framing the gorgeous looking paint master on both sides. You've got the orange PNSO logo in the bottom left hand corner indicating the figure's title and the species it represents in both English and what I assume to be the native language of PNSO. A-Shu is number 42 in their lineup, which is insane to think about. And you can also see that this package bears an articulated jaw indicator on both sides in the lower right-hand corner. The top of the box features another glamour shot of A-Shu from a different angle, as well as the PNSO logo once more and the company tagline, "Every life deserves respect." Like all of the PNSO dinosaur figures, this one comes with a little booklet that contains a child-friendly, informative introduction to A-Shu and Qianzhousaurus in general, as well as a skeletal diagram. Interestingly enough, the silhouette of the Qianzhousaurus in the diagram has feather integument, but as you will see on A-Shu, he is completely naked. I guess I'm basically segueing into talking about the figure itself, so let's just get into that, shall we? As always, we're going to start off with a nice 360-degree view of A-Shu, and he looks incredible out of the box. An admitted step down from the promo images, which we'll talk about later, but I feel like PNSO sets the bar so high with their promo shots that even when the final product doesn't quite reach that level, it still lands pretty high on the awesome scale. Something to note is that like all of the recent bipedal figures from PNSO, A-Shu does come with a plastic support rod, but as you can see, he is doing just fine without it, even in motion. Of the three recent bipedal figures from PNSO I have, this one feels the most sturdy out of all of them, and I find myself worried about it the least. Still, when he's on the shelf for display, I like to use the rod, and it's nice that PNSO includes it just in case. Better safe than sorry. But now for a nice close-up look at our Qianzhousaurus, and I gotta say, this is a gorgeous head sculpt. There are some things that I think come up a little short, but let's focus on the positives first and foremost. First up, obviously, the detail. Oh my gosh, does it look great on this figure. The larger ornamental scales on the front of the snout are amazing, as are the more finite scales adorning the orbits. The lower jaw also features some crisp scale work of varying sizes and shape, and I love the treatment of the nasal ridges and the lacrimal hornlets. The eye is a striking orange coloration with a yellow iris that puts me in mind of the atrocious Sauron eyes of the PNSO original Wilson, but it is done much better here. I must say, I love this thing from a head-on view. I think it looks quite menacing with those eyes and those big nasal horns and the long teeth just staring you down. Now, eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed by now that A-Shu, like all of PNSO's theropods, lacks any form of extraoral tissue, and those long narrow teeth are left jutting straight from the jaws like a crocodile. Now, the sculptor of Winter Wilson went in depth describing their reasoning for omitting extraoral tissue on the latest Rex model from PNSO, and I think they applied a similar reason to A-Shu here and all of their theropods in general. One of the most prominent comparisons made when advocating for extraoral tissue on non-avian dinosaurs would be lizards, particularly monitor lizards, since these are reptilian animals with sometimes massive teeth that are still covered in scaly quote-unquote lips. However, the artist argues that the lower mandible of T-Rex and other tyrannosaurs rests within the upper jaw rather than interlocking like in modern-day extant reptiles. projectiles. This would mean that the teeth of the lower mandible are protected when in a resting position, negating the necessity of extra oral tissue covering them to keep them safe. Now, if I wound up misinterpreting that idea, forgive me, feel free to correct me. I'm having to go off of internet translations since the video was in Chinese, but there were other methods to the madness, and I don't want to get too in-depth here. Suffice it to say that the reasoning is some of the best I've heard to justify the lack of extra oral tissue. Personally, I still lean towards the idea of theropods possessing some form of lips, but I still like the look of lipless dinosaurs, and since there really isn't a definitive right or wrong at this current junction in time, I think it's acceptable to leave that decision up to the artist. And it sounds like PNSO have thought out their reasoning for going with a toothy theropod quite well. Something I think is quite interesting is that the skull of Qianzhousaurus that was found was missing all of its teeth, so that allows for some artistic licenses when recreating this animal. And I gotta say, I love what PNSO did with these long, sharp-looking chompers. They are so well rendered. While we're talking about the mouth, yes, A-Shu does have an articulated jaw which can be opened to varying degrees of width, but once it's nice and wide, you can get a good look at the interior of the mouth. The tongue is nice and long and the throat is sculpted incredibly far back. If we can get a good look at the roof of the mouth, it's a little tricky, I know. You can see that there are little divots that have been sculpted into the palate to accommodate the tops of the teeth from the lower mandible. You've even got these sort of nasal openings in the roof of the mouth, which is a wonderful touch, and I love the fleshy, moist coloration we have in here. It looks great. As a little nitpick, you can see that the part of the cheek flap connected to the lower mandible is a totally different color from the rest of the mouth, which really distracts from the overall look in my opinion. I will also say that just in general, the articulation on this figure is unfortunately not handled as seamlessly as it was on Domingo. Maybe the lighter color is making it more noticeable, but the seam lines are just very apparent, especially around the hinge when the jaw is open. It cripples the figure on close inspection, but from a distance, I guess it's okay. The ears are another problem I have. They just look like a couple of holes that have rotted into the side of the head rather than being functioning ears, and the sloppy black airbrushing around them doesn't help. But beyond the rough jaw, seam lines, lazy ears, and color disparity in the mouth, yeah, beyond all that, I think this is a wonderful head sculpt and it looks fantastic, opened or closed. Finally, moving on from the head and down the body, I think the greatest triumph of this piece's sculpt are the skin details. Not the scale work per se, but just the way the skin is moving with the motion of the animal. You can see those fine wrinkles over the shoulder as the neck cranes upwards and to the right, and then again around the bent up arm. And man, the treatment there, down around the gut, just past the arm, that's incredible. The way it's pulling away from the stomach with the movement of the bracing right leg and then buckling against the tail with several wrinkles and skin folds happening within that slight curve. It all just looks so incredibly lifelike, thought out, and believable. And the same goes for the opposite side where you have the skin pulling away from the tail and pushing folds up against the torso. It all works so well. All of that form language has been saddled with crisp scale work of varying shapes and sizes. You have smaller scales on the neck, torso, and tail, while larger scales run along the dorsal region and up and down the thighs. And you can even see some osteoderms sprinkled throughout. Now, some people have complained that these scales were too large, like on most of PNSO's theropod figures. And whereas I think that is a very fair issue, I will say this is another case where the final product actually succeeds where the paint master fails. The lack of excess washes really helps soften all of the detail on the final figure, resulting in a much less busy look overall. I will say I am still a bit perplexed as to why they chose to not give this guy any feather covering. I mean, both their mini and their bust of the Qianzhousaurus had some sort of feathers. I don't know, maybe they were just following Safari's lead with their 2020 Qianzhousaurus. Now, I have a similar problem with A-Shu that I did with Domingo when it comes to the legs. They just feel a little too beefy, looking like something that would belong to a massive lumbering brute rather than a smaller, more fleet-footed carnivore. I don't know if this is something PNSO does for extra stability, but yeah, it just seems a bit out of place on these particular types of animals. It is well done, there's no denying that. The musculature, particularly in those flexing calves, looks fantastic, and the sort of emu-esque scaling on the backs of the toes is well rendered and very well painted. I love the dark sock-like transitions from the feet up onto the paler colorations of the legs, and the dry brushing on those plate scales really helps bring them to life. The toe claws are also very well painted with some fantastic weathering in the colors. Overall, the feet on this model have a very lived-in look to them, which I always appreciate. The arms are sculpted, bent at the elbows, with the palms facing inwards and have the same sort of color treatment as the feet. The claws look great and are quite sharp, I will say. Now let's look at the underside. Here you can get a good look at the musculature in the lower mandible, as well as all of the lovely skin and scale details in the gullet region. Once you hit the midsection, you can see the sort of chainmail-like scale work, as well as the PNSO logo and copyright info. The cloaca is there. Sorry if it's hard to see, but the scale detail continues all the way down the underside of the tail. As you can see, PNSO really did not leave a speck of space unattended to on this figure. As far as the pose of this model goes, I love it. It's wonderfully fluid and lifelike and very well balanced. The articulated jaw allows you to change the energy of it in an awesome way. With the mouth closed, it looks like it's stalking forward while its head cranes upward and scents the air. However, with the mouth open, it looks as though this Qianzhousaurus has seen something larger than itself and is issuing a warning call, trying to be intimidating. There's a lot of character and life to it, which I always appreciate and prefer to stiff poses for the sake of balance. The paint job is also very nice on this figure and worth celebrating just for its stark contrast to previous PNSO offerings. Looking at it through a computer screen, it's easy to say it's a bit bland, but I think the correct word would be subtle. There's a lot of variation in color within the base coat of this figure, from a sort of grayish tone to mint tones and even a subtle rusty orange color on the chest, around the legs, and lower jaw. This same tone is used to color the ornamentation of the face in a more noticeable manner, and if that isn't enough for you, you have got those brown markings all across the body for some breakup and visual interest. I will say I'm not a huge fan of the black dots airbrushed on the face. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of rhyme or reason to that, and I do miss some of the variation in the color that was present on the markings of the paint master. But all in all, I think this is a very well painted figure that is especially enjoyable given how different it is from everything else PNSO have given us so far. They seem obsessed with warmer and or earthier tones on their dinosaurs. We haven't gotten many with cooler tones, and that makes this a standout amongst my display right off the bat. Now for some measurements. A straight measurement from the tip of the tail to the tip of that long snout puts A-Shu at right around 9¼ inches long, or about 23.5 centimeters. But if you measure along the curve of the back, you're actually looking at something along the lines of 11 inches. He stands at about 3½ inches tall at the back of the head, or just under 9 centimeters. With Qianzhousaurus estimated to be 21 feet in length, that puts A-Shu right around that 125 scale, so unfortunately he will not be sizing up with some of the other PNSO models. And on that note, let's do some size comparisons. Before we get to the other PNSO figures, I gotta compare it to the Safari Ltd Qianzhousaurus from earlier in 2020, which actually seems to be fairly similar to A-Shu in terms of size, bearing in mind that A-Shu has a bit of a curled up pose while Pinocchio there is more stretched out. The similarities begin and end with the size though, because the aesthetics on these two are night and day. If you've seen my review of Pinocchio, you know I found that model to be a bit underwhelming, especially in terms of the paint, which was particularly sloppy on mine. However, there are some things I feel it did better, like the more subtle scale work and gracile ankles, but if I could only keep one for the collection, I think it would be A-Shu. And since that's the only other Qianzhousaurus figure I have, let's do some PNSO comparisons, starting with the most recently reviewed Domingo the Carnotaurus. These two are basically the same price, and as you can see, they are very similar in terms of the overall length. Domingo does stand a bit taller than A-Shu, but A-Shu seems to make up for that with a little extra bulk. If you'd like to see more of Domingo, be sure to check out my review from last week. I will put a link in the description below. Next up, let's bring in Essien 2.0, the Spinosaurus, another similar figure in terms of cost and overall mass, but you can see how A-Shu stands a good deal taller than him. I gotta say, I really appreciate how these new PNSO figures all look like they belong together. Not that Qianzhousaurus would be interacting with these figures or that they're in scale, but the style is so distinct from other brands and it makes all of these PNSO figures stand out so well from other companies and look fantastic when displayed side by side. And next up, I'm going to bring in both the latest version of the OG Wilson mold, since that's like the gold standard PNSO comparison, as well as the new and improved Winter Wilson. Now, I'm actually going to be skipping my review of that figure until I can get the whole defective jaw thing sorted out. When I talk about it, I feel like I should talk about all of its facets, and to do that, I need one with a functioning jaw. But I still wanted to bring it in for a comparison, since these are the two new Tyrannosaurs from PNSO. Also, I just wanted to have it be in a video again since it might not be for a while, and it's just so fabulous. Now, obviously, A-Shu is way too big to be in scale with these Rexes, but it is fun to see them together nonetheless. It also highlights just how far PNSO has come when it comes to making their Tyrannosaurs. And for a final comparison, here it is with their Huanga Titan. I will never get tired of bringing that thing in for size comparisons and just basking in how massive it is, especially in comparison to other PNSO figures. And there you have it, everyone. That is going to do it for my look at A-Shu, the Qianzhousaurus, another win for the company, which has rapidly risen to the top of dinosaur model production in my eyes. The issues of the ears and make of the jaw are quite small in the grand scheme of things, and even though I wish just a little more paint from the promo images made it onto the final figure, I still think this is a wonderful offering of an obscure species. I definitely dig this dino, and it has me excited for what other unique Tyrannosaurs PNSO might have up their sleeve. If you're looking to get it, I'll leave a link in the description to where you can find it. Just remember that if you order it from Dan's, then be sure to mention that Killershrewfan sent you in the comment box at checkout. As always, before you go, be sure to let me know what you think of A-Shu in the comments section down below. Do you own it yet? Are you planning on picking it up? Do you prefer the PNSO or Safari take on this animal? Leave your thoughts down below. Thank you all so much for tuning in to today's review. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again soon for the next one. Take care out there, and bye-bye.